up with a game plan to figure out when they can really retire. And certainly we look at the benefits of Social Security that will cover a good portion of that. And another big topic that we help our members a lot with is estate planning. You know, estate planning is a very broad term, but it's nothing other than making sure our assets go to where we want them to go with the least amount of expenses and hassle at our death. So, but we're very fortunate that we have a number of experts that we work with, and we have one of them here today, Cindy Hill, and she's came here all the way from Waverly, Iowa, and we draw upon her because of her expertise in the area of Social Security. We also, as we do these workshops, we want to make sure that we're adding value to our members, and how we learn that is by you filling out these questionnaires. Just let us know how we did. And also, Cindy will open it up the floor for a few questions, but often we have questions that we might want to know that are a little bit more intimate and what it means for us on a one-on-one basis. So we will make ourselves available in the next several weeks if you'd like to do a one-on-one with us, and you can, with myself or either my partner John Decker, and you can let us know that on here. Matter of fact, if you ask us to call you, we will call you, and if you ask us not to call you, we won't. And we also have our program coordinator, Amber. She's in the back of the room, and she's got our schedules, so that might actually do the very best thing is to, you know, if you want a little more information, to set up a meeting right off the bat. So, Cindy, thanks for being here, and we're looking forward to what you have to say.
All right, thanks, Peter. Well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Oh my gosh, I was going to say this is going to be a tough crowd.
Good evening, Cindy.
Thank you in the back. All right, I'm excited to be here with you all tonight, and as Peter mentioned, I am part of his team based out of Waverly, Iowa, with the broker-dealer called CUNA Brokerage Services. CUNA, C-U-N-A, stands for Credit Union National Association. So our financial advisors, like Peter, are located in credit unions across the country. We enjoy putting on these educational workshops, and as he mentioned, you know, there's a lot of other topics that he enjoys helping members with their questions and better understanding when it comes to their financial planning. And this is definitely a topic that we have found gains a lot of interest, has a lot of interest with our credit union members, because it's near and dear to all of our hearts. We've been paying into Social Security our whole working careers, but very few of us know much about the program itself. I mean, unless you enjoy going out to Social Security's website and perusing around, I'm guessing that you have better things to do with your time. And so we wanted to put this workshop together to just give you more information about this particular topic, because it is an important benefit that you'll be receiving in retirement. And what's interesting, if you were to think about the average benefit, and you add that up through your retirement years, with inflation adjustments, you could easily receive over $500,000 over that period of time. If you have a spouse with a similar benefit, you double that number, and you can see why we oftentimes think of Social Security as one of your largest assets in retirement. Now imagine if that was your 401k savings, or 403b savings, or retirement savings. You know, when you get ready to separate from service, one of those questions that you'll be faced, and chances are this is going to be part of the planning as well, is what do I do with that money? Peter kind of touched on this a little bit. Do I leave it where it's at? Should I roll it to an IRA? If so, where? What should I invest in? And most importantly, how do I safely start taking income from that to make sure it lasts as long as I last through the retirement years? Now the good news is you don't have to make those decisions on your own. Peter's here to help you with those types of questions. He's helping members every single day with that. But the bottom line is you're going to go through a process with him and understand your options. And then whatever decision's made, you're going to make an informed decision, but you're going to take that care and consideration when it comes to your rollover decision. And the same type of care and consideration should also be done when it comes to your Social Security claiming decision. Because if I could have you leave here with just one thought tonight, it'd be this. There is more to this decision than simply taking your benefit as soon as you retire. Honestly, the age at which you pick could literally mean tens of thousands of additional dollars in benefits, depending on when you choose to take it. And while it's an important decision, it's one that shouldn't be made in isolation. It really should be part of a comprehensive financial plan. And we'll talk more about that later, why it's important to look at that holistically. Okay? So, what we're going to talk about tonight, And I'm going to go off script here just for you all. So you're seeing a condensed version of what we cover in a regular workshop. We're not going to make you sit through a whole one. But I just want to cover some of these slides because if we're going to do even a slimmed down version of this workshop, we are hoping that it would be a topic that could be educational for you as well. So if you do have questions as I'm sharing this information, please feel free to ask away, okay? So here are the rules of the road, and some of these we cover more quickly than others. And for tonight, we're just going to touch on a few of these rules. Now, to start with, what an important age for you to know is called full retirement age. And this is the age at which you're able to receive your benefit amount, your full benefit. Now, your benefit is based on your highest 35 years of work history, not necessarily your most recent 35, which I think is important to know because a lot of people take breaks from their careers, or they choose to do a phased retirement, start cutting back their hours. And a lot of members worry that cutting back those hours is going to cause their benefit to be reduced, and that's not the case. Think of it as a high watermark that's been set. So those highest 35 years are added up, and that's what's used to determine what's called your primary insurance amount, or PIA for short. Now that's the amount you're going to get your full retirement age. And you'll notice when the program first began, full retirement age was 65. And it's been gradually increased where now anyone born after 1960, full retirement age is 67. And now while we're on this particular slide, I think it's important to note, we're going to talk more about this later on as far as the future of Social Security. Because a lot of people, a lot of members are very worried about whether or not that's going to be around down the road. And now I left my crystal ball back in Iowa, but I'll share with you in more detail as far as the state of the Social Security program. But while we're on here, this is one particular area that has been discussed as potentially changing. Because notice that this is the maximum full retirement age. So anyone born after that date, that's when they're going to get 100% of their benefit amount. Now, when you think about what's been happening with life expectancy, if you look back in the 30s, full retirement age was 65. What do you think life expectancy was back in the 30s?
65?
Yeah, they expected you to have one foot in the grave by the time that you started drawing your benefit. And now it has been gradually increased, and like I said, now actually starting next year, individuals who are getting to eligibility age, full retirement age is 67. But what's happening with life expectancy now? It's mid to late 80s, right? Shame on us for living longer. But that's one area that has been discussed, is maybe continuing to extend that out for the younger generations. My full retirement age is 67. Does it make sense that my children and future grandchildren would have the same full retirement age as myself when you think about what's happening with life expectancies? So that might happen. Time will tell on that. Now, this is the age at which you're able to receive 100% of your benefit amount, but you don't have to wait to this age, do you? What's the earliest age you're able to start drawing your benefit? 62. 62. But if you do that, you're going to receive a reduction to that benefit, and it's a permanent reduction. You don't make that back up. And so here's an example looking at somebody who, say, full retirement age was 66. If they had taken that benefit as soon as possible, they would have been hit with a 25% reduction. So if that person had been eligible for a $2,000 benefit based on their work history, they're choosing to give up $500 a month each year going forward. Now what's interesting though is I mentioned the raising of that full retirement age. Individuals turning 62 this year, their full retirement age is 66 and 10 months. So if they make the same election, they're just taking it that many more months early. So instead of a 25% reduction, their reduction is 27.5%. So that same election is causing individuals who are retiring now going forward, if they continue to try to take it as soon as possible, is having a bigger impact on the net amount that we're going to be receiving. Now you might look at this and say, okay, well I understand that I'm going to get hit with a reduction if I take my benefit early, but at least I'm getting the benefit, versus waiting until 66, because otherwise I would have missed out on 4 years worth of benefits, reduced or otherwise. And so wouldn't I be better off in that situation? Well, depends. Depends on how long you live in retirement. Because here's why. When you compare two options, option A, take your benefit as soon as possible. Option B, take your benefit at 66 or whatever your full retirement age. Yes, if you start adding up the benefits received, you're getting something by taking it as soon as possible. But when you compare it to your full retirement age amount, you're starting out at a higher amount. And so that's accumulating at a faster rate. And of course, think about those annual adjustments. So of course, a percentage of $2,000 is going to be a greater increase than a percentage of $1,500. So eventually, this side, catches up and surpasses the first option of taking it early. Now, what is that age at which it surpasses? Well, we call that the break-even age. I've got a slide on that later on. That age is going to vary depending on the ages we're comparing, the benefit amounts we're using, and the inflation assumption. But for now, let's just say it's late 70s, early 80s, okay? So what that means is if you live past that particular age, you're actually going to get more in benefits by waiting, okay? And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How long are you going to live in retirement? And nobody knows the answer to that question, and that's where working with Peter, he's going to talk to you about just kind of your personal feelings about it, maybe your personal health history, your family history, and having a deeper discussion on that particular topic. But it is something to be mindful of. Because we are typically living well past those ages in retirement. Now, while you get a bit of a ding for taking your benefit early, you also get a bonus for waiting. Each year you wait past your full retirement age, your benefit is guaranteed to grow by 8% plus inflation. Now, looking at my example of somebody whose full retirement age was 66, if you wait till 70, your benefit is going to be 32% higher than if you'd taken it at 66. Now, you might look at this and say, well, why would I let the government keep my money any longer than necessary? And we're not here to tell you that you shouldn't feel that way. Some people are quite passionate about that. But if you look at it from an investment perspective, this is a really good deal. Your benefit is guaranteed to grow by 8% plus inflation over a 4-year period. Can you name me any other investment that has that type of guarantee? Certainly we know market returns can be higher than that, but we also know it can be a lot lower than that as well. So rather than using and taking your benefit as soon as possible, this is where it's about considering maybe using some lower returning, lower yielding types of investments in the short term to cover your expenses over those first few years while we let this benefit continue to grow, at which time now we've got a higher income source through Social Security starting at the age of 70 for the remainder of our lifetime. So if we live to say 90, that's 20 years where now we've got Social Security covering more of our expenses where we don't have to rely as much on our personal savings. And it's quite fascinating how some of our analyses come out, even though it seems counterintuitive to use some of our personal savings up front, leaving this benefit alone. But not everybody's in a financial position to do this. And that's why I said this is an important decision, but it's one that shouldn't be made in isolation. Really should be part of a comprehensive financial plan to first see if this is even an option for you, and if so, to what extent does it improve the overall success of your plan. But this is an important decision because when you look at your age 70 amount and you compare it to your age 62 amount, your age 70 amount is 76% higher than your age 62 amount. That's a significant difference and really can impact the overall success of a plan and the amount of income that you're receiving through your retirement years. Okay? Now I want to switch gears and talk about spousal benefits. Now what we have found is that a lot of our members are very familiar with survivor benefits, that if my spouse passes away and their benefit is higher than mine, I can start receiving that amount. But what if your spouse is still living? Could you be receiving a higher amount off of your spouse's record? Potentially. Here's how this works. When you file for benefits, they're going to compare your own benefit versus up to 50% of your spouse's and give you the higher of the two. So let's look at Ted and Sarah. And here I've got Ted as the high earner, Sarah as the low earner. Let's say that Ted, based on his work history, was eligible for a $2,000 monthly benefit. Sarah, based on her work history, was eligible for an $800 monthly benefit. When they file for benefits, they're going to compare their own versus 50% of the others. So Ted's own amount is $2,000, Half of Sarah's is only $400. Now, he doesn't get both. That would be pretty awesome, wouldn't it? But he's just going to get his $2,000 retirement benefit. That's it. But look at what happens for Sarah. Her own amount is $800. Half of Ted's amount, though, is $1,000. So Social Security is going to pay her her $800 benefit, plus give her a $200 adjustment on top of that, so that the two combined equals $1,000. Okay? Now, even if this was zero, let's say that Sarah didn't have her own Social Security benefit, because you need to have been participating in the Social Security program a minimum of 10 years, paying those payroll taxes in order to get any type of benefit. So let's say that she hadn't done that. She was, say, a stay-at-home mom, or did volunteer work or what have you. And even if this was zero, she would still be able to get $1,000 off of Ted's record. I like to think of that as the June Cleaver benefit, right? Now, you've heard of June. No?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's worrying me. June took care of Wally and the bee, had a nice dinner on the table when Ward came home from work. House was always spick and span. She always looked immaculate. She was a hard-working lady, even though she didn't work outside of the home. She would have been able to get half of Ward's amount, whatever that amount would have been, okay? Now, there's a few caveats to go along with this rule. Now, Sarah cannot get that higher amount until Ted has actually filed for benefits. So she can't go in prematurely and say, Ted's still working, or he wants to wait till 70, but go ahead and give me that $1,000. No, unfortunately, she'll get the increase once Ted has actually filed for benefits. Now, also, just like our own retirement benefit, a spousal benefit can start earlier than full retirement age. It can start as early as 62. But just like our own retirement benefit, if it's taken early, what do you think happens? There's a reduction. So if Sarah takes her benefit, and let's say there's an age difference between the two of them, and Sarah's 62, Ted's 66, if she takes the spousal benefit at 62, instead of getting half of Ted's amount, she's going to get 35% of Ted's amount. So it is reduced by taking it early, okay? Now, let's flip to the other side. Let's say Ted had taken his early at 62, and he's getting $1,500. But Sarah did wait till her full retirement age. So she's still going to be able to get 50%. Of which amount? She actually gets 50% of his original $2,000, even though he's currently receiving $1,500. She's not penalized because he took his early, okay? So she's still going to get 50% of his amount, his original $2,000. It's only reduced if she takes it before her full retirement age. Make sense? Okay. And then also there's no opportunity for delayed retirement credits on a spousal benefit. So when it comes to a spousal benefit, the most she's going to get is $1,000. So there wouldn't be any reason to delay past full retirement age if that's the maximum that she would be receiving. Okay. Now, a natural follow-up question to this is, what if Ted and Sarah get a divorce? Can Sarah still receive that $1,000 off of Ted's record? Yes, she sure can, as long as the marriage lasted at least 10 years and Sarah is unmarried, okay? Now, there's a couple differences between divorced spouses and married spouses. Remember that I said when Ted and Sarah were married, Sarah could not get that extra amount until Ted actually filed for benefits, okay? However, with divorced spouses, if the divorce is longer than 2 years prior, Sarah does not have to wait for Ted to actually go and file for benefits. The only requirement is that he be at least 62 years of age, where he'd be eligible to take his benefit if he wanted to. And I think that's good news, because there's a reason that the divorce happened. So can you imagine if Sarah had to go to Ted and say, I know I got the house, the kids, the dog, the cat, half your 401k, but can you also go and file for benefits so I can collect off your record? What do you think Ted might say at that point?
Sure, honey.
Yeah, exactly. And so thankfully that conversation doesn't have to happen. So, and Ted's not even notified that Sarah's collecting off of his record. And that's okay. Here's why. Ted's own benefit isn't reduced. He can still get his $2,000. And even if Ted has married a second time, let's say he's married to Jane, and if Jane was also a low-earning spouse, Jane can also get $1,000 off of Ted's record, even though Sarah, the ex-wife, is collecting off of his record. And it's not prorated, so they both get the $1,000. Let's say that Ted and Jane get a divorce after 10 years. And that means Jane can continue to receive that $1,000. And if Ted is remarried a third time, we can have multiple, former spouses. And this is when people say, what'd you say?
I said, go Ted.
Yeah. This is when people say, no wonder Social Security is running out of money, when you can have all these people collecting off of a single person's record. But the caveat being that if a spouse does, a divorced spouse does remarry, so if Sarah remarries, she can't collect off of Ted anymore because now she has a new husband she can be collecting off of. Now, there's only so many former spouses we could be talking about because of the 10-year marriage rule requirement. So unless Ted was 5 when he started getting married, there's only so many exes that could be out there. But it is a reminder that there could be multiple individuals. I say individuals because these are gender-neutral rules. We're picking on Ted here, but it could be working in the reverse as well. And now let me throw this question at you. So Sarah gets remarried, so she can't collect off of Ted, the ex, anymore. If that second marriage comes to an end, can she leapfrog back and start collecting off of Ted again? She can. She actually can. And if that second marriage had lasted 10 years, she could compare the two. She wouldn't get both, that would be greedy, but she could compare the two benefits, and if Ted's happened to be the higher of the two, she can go back and she can start collecting off of Ted again. So we're really picking on Ted here, but given the divorce rates in America, it's important to go over these rules because I'm willing to bet that there are people missing out on benefits, didn't even know that they could go back and start collecting off of someone again. Because I can guarantee you Social Security is not going to call you up and say, hey, did you know? So this is why we like to share these little nuances that are in the rules. Okay? Switching gears, let's talk about survivor benefits. And now this is, this is something that, of course, and sadly, we oftentimes have to deal with at some point in our lives. And so if a spouse passes away and their benefit is greater than ours, then our benefit will stop and we'll start receiving their higher amount. That's where those delayed retirement credits can really be helpful. Think about it, if Ted had waited till age 70 to draw his amount, he increased that $2,000 to the $2,640. That's the amount that Sarah would receive as a surviving spouse. Because when you lose a spouse, there's lost income. I mean, even though the survivor gets to switch over to the other person's benefit if it was higher, the bottom line is we've still lost a benefit. We used to have 2 Social Security benefits coming into the household. Now we're down to 1. And that's where the planning is so important. Again, Peter touched on this in his opening, is to make sure that we've got a plan that's going to be successful not only while you're both living, but even in a surviving spouse situation. And making sure that you're going to have the resources there to cover those expenses, whatever they may be, afterwards. Notice that a survivor can start taking benefits as early as age 60. But again, they're going to be reduced if you take them early. So if you take them at 60, it's a 28.5% reduction. Now here's what's interesting to know about survivor benefits. You'll notice that when Ted and Sarah were living, Sarah's spousal benefit was really a combination of 2 things. It was her own benefit plus the adjustment that made up that $1,000. So it's kind of commingled. With survivor benefits, really think of this as 2 buckets of money. So if you are a younger survivor, you actually have the choice of starting one and then switching to another one later on. Okay? Now, sadly enough, Social Security gets this rule wrong quite often. Because there used to be a strategy that spouses could use together when living, where you could start one benefit and switch to another. That one's actually being phased out for you all. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But that one's actually being phased out, but it did not impact survivor benefits. You can start one benefit and switch to another. There was an internal audit that was done with Social Security Administration that did a random sampling of widow and widower cases. What they found is that over 80% of the cases they sampled, took a look at, those widows and widowers were being underpaid because they were not told all the information they needed to be told in order to maximize the potential amount received. So for example, I could start taking a survivor benefit at age 60, reduced, okay? but I could leave my benefit alone and switch to my higher amount later on. And it could potentially grow to a higher amount. Well, Social Security is telling individuals you can't do that. If your benefit's the highest, you've got to take your benefit. You can't pick a lower survivor and switch to your higher one later on. I found that very startling, that over 80% of the cases they randomly sampled, people were being underpaid. Now, they made those individuals whole, but what about all those other cases that didn't get looked at in the audit? So this is why we share this information with you, to try to arm you with the information that if you go in and when you go into Social Security, no matter what type of filing you're doing, that we're arming you with the information, because most people wouldn't even know to second guess or ask questions if it didn't feel right as far as the information that's being given to you. And then also the ex-spouse survivor can also continue to receive those benefits as well. Ted and Sarah get a divorce, we still got that 10-year marriage rule requirement. But here's an interesting little nugget for you. If Sarah remarries after the age of 60, she actually preserves the option to still collect off of Ted, her former spouse, even though she's married to somebody new. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't keep the rules the same. I'm guessing somebody in Congress benefited from that, because it just doesn't even make sense, but that's the way the rules work, is that if you have exes and you remarry after the age of 60, even though you're married to somebody new, if your ex passes away, you could collect a survivor benefit off of their record. I've actually seen marital planning happening in the audience when I've shared that, because you might come with a significant other and they're like, hey, let's wait till we're 60 to get married here, just in case our ex passes away before us and we can collect off their record. But those types of little nuggets are buried into the Social Security handbook that a lot of people wouldn't even realize exist. Now, when you think about retirement planning, there's a lot of risks to retirement. Peter kind of touched on this. All sorts of different planning that's required. And the fact that we could be in retirement for 20, 30 years, one risk that we got to be mindful of is inflation risk. What's going to happen to the cost of goods over that period of time? So anytime you have an income source that's inflation adjusted is a good thing. This is showing you a history of the adjustments made to Social Security. Now, there's been times where there's been very high inflation and large increases, and then there's been time where inflation has been very low. Look at 2010 and 2011. No increases were given to our Social Security recipients those years. Happened again in 2016. Very small increase in 2017. Try to tell our Social Security recipients that they weren't experiencing inflation, they probably give you an earful. Because when you think about what's happened with healthcare costs and things like that. So now the good news to this is when you're in retirement and you're on Medicare, your Medicare Part B premiums are deducted from your Social Security check. Now there's a hold harmless provision that if, let's say there's a year where there is no increase to Social Security, they cannot increase your Medicare Part B premiums either. So, in other words, this hold harmless provision says that your Medicare premiums can't increase any faster than your Social Security check increases. And that way the net amount that you receive at the very least stays the same year after year. But of course, what's happening though to your other expenses? And that's why it's important to think about what am I doing with the rest of my savings to make sure I've got growth that's happening with at least some of that money to offset the effects of inflation. Now, of course, we had a nice increase in 2018. So a 2% increase that happened with Social Security. What do you think happened to the Medicare premiums? Went up by about the same amount. So the net amount the individuals received was still about the same. Now this year, though, was a really nice year for Social Security recipients. They had a 2.8% increase to their Social Security checks. Medicare Part B premiums only went up by $1.50. So they truly saw a net increase happen this year. So that was good news for them. But that's just something to keep in mind, that we got to remember about inflation. And while there is some protection, we've got to think of ourselves as long-term investors, even in retirement, where we keep at least a portion of our savings invested in a way to have that growth potential. Now, what about the future of Social Security? Imagine that I left my crystal ball back in Iowa, But here's the state of the program as it stands today. There is a trust fund that's valued at $2.8 trillion. Putting that to the side for a moment, where does the majority of the money come from to pay Social Security benefits? Wages from the workers, payroll taxes. Now, there was a period of time that the payroll taxes that were withheld were more than sufficient to cover the benefits, and that was partly what built up this trust fund. Now, we're at a crossover point where now the payroll taxes collected are not quite enough to cover the benefits going out, so we're having to tap into this trust fund. Now, if nothing's done to fix the system, it is anticipated that it's going to run out of money in the year 2034. Now, here's where I get a little upset with the media, because they oftentimes make it sound like when the trust fund runs out of money, Social Security is going to blow up, it's going to cease to exist, and nobody's going to get paid anything at that point. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth, because as we just said, the majority of the money to pay the benefits is coming from workers. Well, I certainly hope we have people working in 2034. We're going to have bigger problems than the trust fund running out of money. So what the projections are is that if there isn't a trust fund and we're just relying solely on the payroll taxes, they would be able to cover about 79% of the benefits going out. Now, nobody wants to get 79% of what they're supposed to, as opposed to 100%. But it's also maybe not as dire as it's played out in the media, which would make it sound like you're not going to get anything if that happens. Now, I do believe that the fix will get put in place eventually. Some of the proposals that have been tossed out, I mentioned the raising of the full retirement age. Other things that I've seen mentioned is continuing to raise the taxable wage base, because we as employees and employers each pay 6.2% on our wages. But that's only up to a certain amount. I think it's like $138,000 is where it's at. So if you make more than that, you're only taxed for Social Security up to that level. But that's all you get credit for as well when it comes to calculating the benefit amount. Now, so there's been, talk about continuing to raise that, maybe even raising that payroll tax to around 7% for both the employer and employee. In fact, I saw one study that showed that if we would just round that out to 7%, both employer and employee, and we raise the taxable wage base to $250,000, Social Security would be fully funded for the next 80 years. So, it might be a combination of things. I've also seen discussion where potentially changing how the benefit formulas are calculated for the younger generations, maybe changing the earliest start age for the younger folks, maybe not starting at 62, but maybe they have to wait till say 65 would be their earliest age. See a lot of the changes geared towards the younger people, because ask a young person what they think of Social Security and what are they going to tell you? They don't think it's going to be there, so if they get something, they're going to be happy. But I do believe that at some point the changes will be made because even if we're talking about a 21% cut, we know a lot of individuals in retirement that rely on every single dollar of that Social Security benefit. Can you imagine what's going to happen to those individuals if they could not get 100% of what they're supposed to? And can you imagine what would happen to those politicians if they let that happen? Because what's most important to a politician? Votes, getting reelected. And I would hope that every single one of them would be voted out if they allowed that to happen when they've known about this for so many years. So I do believe, just for that selfish reason alone, that they'll get the changes made. But it might be December 31st, 2033 at 11:59 p.m. is when the changes happen. But but if the worst case scenario happens, if that were to happen, keep in mind that there's not a grandfather clause. Doesn't matter whether you take your benefit at 62, full retirement age 70, we're all going to be impacted by this reduction if it happens. So that's where I encourage you to, when it comes to your retirement planning, make the claiming decision based on what's best for you and your spouse, and if you have a spouse, and your personal situation, not off of something that may or may not happen down the road. And if anything, you can meet with Peter and he can run an analysis, say, okay, what would my plan look like if I did only have 80% of my benefit? And he could let you know what that worst case scenario would look like as well. Kind of doing that stress testing if you'd like. So again, kind of keep all that in mind when it comes to your claiming decision. I mentioned the break-even age, so this is just showing you some of those ages that I was mentioning that are comparing. And again, these will vary depending on the inflation assumption used. But again, you look at 66 to 70. Let's say that Ted had waited till age 70 to draw his benefit, but then he died at 75. Did Ted make a bad choice? Not necessarily, because what happens to his higher benefit? Sarah gets it for the remainder of her lifetime. So when we're talking about delaying benefits, especially when we're working with couples, don't forget about the survivorship or the survivor element, because typically we're trying to increase the higher earner's benefit. And so when you're thinking about break-even ages, it really becomes a question of what's the likelihood of at least one of you living past that age. And that really puts a different perspective to that decision as well. I wanted to show you kind of another side-by-side and how these benefits can really add up over the retirement years. I've got Bob and Betty. You'll notice that their benefits are exactly the same as Ted and Sarah's. Nothing magical to this, I just like to keep the examples consistent. So if Bob and Betty both start taking their benefits right away at 66, and they're getting $3,000 a month, if they live to kind of normal life expectancies, I got Bob living to 85, Betty living to 90, without inflation factored in, the total amount of benefits they would receive over that period of time would be $840,000. It's a large sum of money. But look at what happens on the right-hand side. If Bob waits till 70 to take his amount, and then let's say Betty still takes hers at 66, remembering she can only get her retirement benefit because Bob hasn't turned his on. So she's going to get $800. And then when Bob starts his at 70, she can start receiving the spousal benefit of $1,000, still based off of his original amount, because the spousal benefit can't increase due to delayed retirement credits. But even though Bob gave up 4 years worth of benefits, even though Betty missed out on that extra $200 over that same period of time, notice at the end of their retirement span, they still received about $56,000 more in Social Security benefits. And with inflation factored in, the difference was over $100,000. But again, not everybody's in a financial position to delay benefits. I've got a nice clean scenario here where they happen to be the same age, they happen to be retiring at the same time, and that's not always the case. You might even be a single person. I'm looking at a couple here. What if you're single? What if you're divorced? What if you're a widow or widower? What if you are married and you are at different ages and retiring at different times? Everybody's situation is different. And that's why it's really important to sit down and meet with Peter, have him do a full retirement analysis for you so he can put all the pieces of the puzzle together in understanding, should I delay my benefits? Should I take it early? If I do delay, where am I going to get the income from to fill those short-term needs while I wait for Social Security to kick in? And that's what he's able to do for you by doing that comprehensive plan. Because if you go to Social Security, they're there to answer a lot of questions for you. But what's the one thing that they cannot, nor are they allowed to provide to you? Advice. We wouldn't want them to. They don't know your full financial situation. Only Peter can help you with that. And that's where he's able to look at that holistically and really get you understanding what your options are and what might be the best path for you to take. So I thank you for your time and your attention tonight, and I wish you well on your retirement journey. So thanks for coming out.
Thanks again, Cindy. Very, very informative. As we can see, there's a lot of different things that can affect our Social Security, like when we should take it and all that. We do see some advantages by maybe waiting in a lot of cases, but if we do that, we've got to fill that gap in with something. And that's part of the retirement plan that we can do for you here. That's one of the benefits that we make, that the credit union makes available to you here at the credit union. So we're glad to help you out any way we can in that. Remember the evaluation form?
Just put your name on it.
Appreciate you filling that evaluation form out. And let us know. Again, I have Amber, our coordinators, in the back of the room. She's got my calendar, and she has my calendar, and feel free to talk to her. We can set up a time for you to sign in, and we can run some of the numbers for yourself. It's always best to kind of plan these things ahead of time before all of a sudden one day I would be on a doorstep. So, thanks again for coming, and keep in mind, of the different services that's made available to you through your credit union here at Wildfire Financial Group. Thank you.